I thought I understood power until a little girl looked at me and called me the wrong kind of man. The ballroom felt too bright that night, like every chandelier was trying to expose something I'd buried 10 years ago. And I remember the exact moment it happened because everything slowed. The music, the laughter, even the way people moved around me like I owned the air they breathed, which I did, in a way. But none of that mattered when I heard her voice, small, steady, too certain for someone who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Mom says bad men look like you. And I froze, not because I was offended, not because anyone had ever dared to say something like that to my face, but because when I turned, when I actually looked at her, I saw myself staring back in a way that didn't make sense. Same dark eyes, same shape, same quiet intensity that people said made grown men nervous. And for a second I forgot where I was, forgot the deals waiting to be signed, forgot the people watching me, because all I could see was that little girl standing beside a woman who was already pulling her back like she knew exactly what I was, like she knew I shouldn't be anywhere near them. And maybe she was right. Maybe she was smarter than everyone else in that room, because I took one step closer without asking permission, without thinking, drawn by something I couldn't explain, and the closer I got, the louder my pulse sounded in my ears, not fast, not panicked, just heavy, deliberate, like something inside me was waking up after a long time asleep. And the girl didn't flinch, didn't hide. She just looked at me with a kind of curiosity that made it worse, because it wasn't fear, it was recognition, and that shouldn't have been possible, not after 10 years, not after everything that night took from me. And I heard myself speak before I decided to, my voice lower than usual, controlled. "What's your name?" But she didn't answer, she just looked up at the woman beside her. And that's when I saw her face clearly, and something in my chest tightened in a way I wasn't used to, because I knew that face, not exactly as it was now, older, sharper, more guarded. But I knew it, or at least I knew the feeling of it, like a memory just out of reach. And she stepped slightly in front of the girl, protective, deliberate, her hand tightening around the child's as if she could pull her out of my world by force alone. And when her eyes met mine, there it was, not fear exactly, but something close to it, something layered with history. And she said quietly, almost like a warning, "We should go." But I didn't move, didn't let them pass, not because I wanted control, though that was second nature to me, but because something about this didn't add up, something about the girl, the timing, the way her features mirrored mine so precisely it felt like a reflection I hadn't consented to. And I asked the question that changed everything, even if I didn't realize it yet. Where did she come from? And the silence that followed told me more than any answer could have, because the woman's grip tightened. Her eyes flickered just for a second, and in that second I knew, whatever this was, whatever truth had been buried for a decade, it was standing right in front of me, breathing, watching, and I wasn't going to let it walk away again. I had built my life on reading people before they spoke, on catching the smallest shift in posture, the flicker in someone's eyes that betrayed what they were trying to hide. And in that moment I saw everything she did not say, the way her shoulders tensed, the way she positioned herself between me and the girl like a barrier that had been rehearsed too many times, like she had been expecting this exact moment for years. And that did not make sense unless she knew who I was long before I knew who she was. And I did not like not knowing, I never had. So I stepped closer, slow enough not to startle the child, deliberate enough that no one else in the room would mistake what was happening. Because when I moved, people noticed. They always did. Conversations lowered, space opened, and still she did not back away, which told me something else. She was not weak, just careful, and I lowered my voice, not for her, but for the girl, because something in me resisted letting fear touch her. "You can answer me," I said, softer this time. And the little girl tilted her head slightly, studying me in a way that felt far too aware, far too familiar. And then she spoke again, calm, unafraid. "My name is Lily." And it hit harder than it should have. Just a name, simple, ordinary, but it settled somewhere deep, like it belonged there, like I had heard it before in a life I could not quite reach. And I repeated it without thinking. "Lily," testing it. And the woman's reaction was immediate, a sharp inhale she tried to hide, a glance around the room like she was calculating exits, timing, distance. And that was when I knew she was about to run, not walk away politely, not excuse herself like everyone else here would have done, but run. disappear the way people did when they had something to lose, and I could not allow that. Not this time. Not when every instinct I had was telling me this was not coincidence, so I spoke again. More direct now. And your last name. And the silence stretched. Just long enough to confirm everything. Because she did not want to say it. She did not want me to hear it. But the girl did not hesitate. She looked straight at me and answered with complete honesty. Carter. And I watched the woman close her eyes for a fraction of a second like the truth had just slipped through her fingers. And that name meant nothing on its own. But the way she reacted to it meant everything. Because people do not fear names unless those names connect to something they are trying to bury, and I leaned slightly closer, just enough that only she could hear me. That is not the name you are afraid of, I said quietly, and her eyes snapped back to mine, sharp now, defensive, and for the first time her voice carried something stronger than caution. You are mistaken, she said, controlled, practiced, but I had heard too many lies in my life to miss the truth hiding underneath and behind her. Lily reached for her hand again, small fingers wrapping around hers with trust that felt undeserved in my presence. And I noticed the detail that made everything inside me go still. The bracelet on her wrist, simple, silver, worn smooth like it had been touched 1,000 times, and I knew that bracelet, not from memory exactly, but from a feeling that hit without warning, rain against glass, a night that never really left me. And I did not realize I had reached out until my fingers were inches away from it, stopping myself before I crossed a line I could not uncross. And when I looked back at the woman, at Emily, because now I was certain that was her name even if she had not said it yet, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever she had been running from for 10 years, it had just found her again. And this time, I was not going to let her disappear before I got the truth. I had spent a decade building walls no one could climb, systems no one could break, and instincts that kept me 10 steps ahead of anyone who thought they could outplay me. But standing there, watching her hold that child's hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded, I realized something had slipped through all of it, something I never saw coming, and that bothered me more than anything, because I do not ignore patterns. And this was a pattern I could not explain, not yet, but I would. I always did, so I straightened slightly, letting the weight of the room settle back around us, the quiet attention, the subtle shift of people pretending not to watch, and I said her name without asking for it, testing the truth in the air. Emily. And the reaction was immediate. Her breath caught. Her grip tightened on Lily's hand. And that was all the confirmation I needed. Because people only react like that when the past finds them unexpectedly. And I lowered my voice again, steady, controlled. You disappeared, I said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. And her eyes hardened. Not denial, not confusion, just resistance, like she had practiced this moment in her head 100 times and still was not ready for it. You have the wrong person, she replied, but it did not land, not even close, because I could see the memory behind her eyes, the same one that had been chasing me for 10 years without a face, just fragments, rain against the windshield, headlights cutting through darkness, a silhouette walking away when I thought I had more time, and I took another step closer, slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to leave if she could, but she did not move, and that told me she knew she could not anymore. And behind her, Lily shifted slightly, looking between us with that same unsettling awareness, like she understood more than she should, and then she did something small that hit harder than anything else. She stepped slightly to the side, just enough that I could see her clearly again, like she was not afraid to be seen, and I noticed it again, the way her eyes tracked mine, the way her expression mirrored my own without effort, and something inside me settled into certainty I had been resisting since the first second I saw her, and I spoke without softening it this time. How old is she? And Emily hesitated, just for a second, but that second was everything, because when people hesitate on simple truths, it means those truths carry weight, and she answered quietly, she is 9. And the number landed exactly where I knew it would, aligning perfectly with the timeline I had never been able to close, the gap that never made sense no matter how many reports I read or how many people I questioned, and I exhaled slowly, not because I was surprised, but because the final piece had just clicked into place, and I looked at Lily again, really looked this time, at the details I could not ignore anymore, the way she held her posture, The calm in her expression, the quiet confidence that did not belong to a child, raised in fear. And I asked the question that mattered more than anything else in that moment. The one that would either confirm everything or break it apart completely. Has she ever asked about her father? And Emily's composure cracked, not visibly to anyone else. But I saw it. The slight tremor, the shift in her breathing, the way her eyes flickered down to Lily for just a fraction of a second before coming back to me. And that was when I knew the truth was not just buried, it had been protected, carefully, deliberately, for years, and whatever reason she had for doing it, whatever she thought she was saving that child from, it had just run out of time, because I was not walking away from this, not again, not when the past was standing right in front of me, looking exactly like me, waiting for answers I did not even know I owed. I did not need her to say it out loud anymore because the silence between us had already confirmed what mattered, and I could feel the shift happening, not just in her, but in me, something tightening, something locking into place with a certainty I had not allowed myself to feel in years. And I glanced around the room briefly, not to check who was watching, but to remind myself that this was not the place for answers. Not with 100 strangers pretending not to listen, not with her already calculating how to disappear again, because she was. I could see it in the way her weight shifted slightly toward the exit, the way her eyes kept measuring distance, time, possibility, and I spoke before she could act on it. My tone quieter but carrying enough authority that she knew I was not asking. You are not leaving yet. And she stiffened at that, not surprised, just frustrated. Like she had expected resistance but hoped for a different outcome. And she shook her head slightly, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You do not get to decide that. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost let that stand, because 10 years ago I might have. 10 years ago, I might have let her walk away without understanding what I was losing. But I was not that man anymore, and I met her gaze without flinching. I should have decided that 10 years ago, I said, and that landed. I saw it land in the way her expression faltered just enough to reveal something underneath the control, something closer to regret than fear. And Lily looked between us again, her small hand tightening around Emily's, sensing the tension without understanding it. And I crouched slightly, lowering myself to her level without thinking, because standing above her suddenly felt wrong, and I softened my voice in a way I had not used in a long time. Lily, I said, steady, careful. Do you like it here? And she nodded once, simple, honest. It is pretty, she said, glancing up at the lights, and I followed her gaze for a second, letting that small, normal moment settle. Before I asked the next question, the one that mattered more than anything else. Do you live nearby? And Emily stepped in immediately, cutting it off. That is enough, she said, sharper now. And I stood again slowly, returning my attention fully to her. Because this was not about small talk. This was about the truth she had been carrying for nearly a decade. And I lowered my voice again, controlled, precise. You do not get to decide what I know about my own life. And her eyes flashed at that, anger this time, real and unfiltered. Your life, she repeated quietly. And there was something in the way she said it that carried years of distance, years of decisions made without me. And she shook her head slightly. You do not even know what you are talking about. And that might have been true once, but not anymore. Not after everything had just aligned so perfectly it was impossible to ignore. And I took one final step closer, close enough that she could not pretend this was coincidence, close enough that she had to face it. And I said it clearly, without raising my voice, without giving her space to deflect it. She is mine. And the words hung there between us, heavy, undeniable, not a threat, not a claim of ownership, but a recognition of something deeper, something that had existed long before this moment. And Emily closed her eyes for a second like she had been holding that exact sentence back for years. And when she opened them again, there was no denial left. Only exhaustion. Only the weight of a truth that had finally caught up to both of us. And she whispered, barely audible, "You were not supposed to find out like this." And that was when I understood. This was never about hiding from me. It was about protecting something from me, or maybe from the world I represented. And either way, it meant one thing I could not ignore. She had made that choice alone, and now I was going to understand why. For a moment neither of us spoke, and the silence felt heavier than anything she could have said, because it carried 10 years of decisions, 10 years of distance, 10 years of a life I had never been part of, and I could see it in her face now. Not fear, not even anger anymore, just exhaustion, like she had been holding this truth alone for too long and did not have the strength to fight it anymore. And I lowered my voice, not softer, just steadier. Then tell me how I was supposed to find out, I said, and she let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but without any humor in it, her hand brushing gently over Lily's hair in a motion that felt automatic, protective, grounding. You were not supposed to find out at all, she replied, and that landed differently than anything else, because it was not defiance, it was final, like she had built her entire life around that one decision, and I felt something shift in my chest again, not anger exactly, but something close to it, something sharper, because she had taken a truth that belonged to both of us and buried it like it was hers alone to control, and I shook my head slightly, keeping my voice low enough that Lily would not catch the edge of it. You do not get to make that choice for me, I said, and her eyes lifted to meet mine, steady now, resigned but not weak. I already did, she answered, and there was no apology in it, no attempt to soften it, just the reality of what she had lived with for years, and that should have pushed me to press harder, to demand answers the way I would from anyone else. But this was not anyone else, and she was not hiding out of fear for herself. I could see that now. Every instinct I had told me the same thing. She had been protecting the child, not running from me, and that changed everything, because it meant whatever happened 10 years ago had not just been an accident or a misunderstanding. It had been a turning point, something serious enough to make her walk away without looking back, and I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to step back half a pace, not to give up control, but to change the way this conversation was moving, because pushing her would only make her retreat again, and I could not let that happen, not now. So I shifted my attention slightly, letting my gaze rest on Lily for a second, grounding myself in something real, something undeniable, and I spoke. Again, more measured this time. Does she know? I asked, and Emily's hand stilled in Lily's hair, just for a second, before she answered quietly, no. And that single word carried more weight than anything else she had said, because it meant the truth had not just been hidden from me, it had been hidden from the one person it would matter to the most, and I nodded once, processing that, understanding the depth of the choice she had made, and the cost of it, and I looked back at her, holding her gaze with the same certainty I had felt from the beginning. She deserves to know, I said, not as a demand, but as a fact, and for the first time since this started, something in her expression shifted in a way I could not immediately read, not resistance, not agreement, just hesitation, like she was standing at the edge of something she had been avoiding for years, and Lily looked up at her then, sensing the change, her voice small but clear. Know what? She asked, and the question hung in the air between us, simple and innocent and impossible to ignore, and Emily's fingers tightened slightly around hers as she closed her eyes for just a second before opening them again. And when she looked at me this time, there was something new there, something that had not been there before, not fear, not anger, but a quiet acceptance that whatever came next could not be undone. And I understood in that moment that this was no longer about whether the truth would come out. It was about how, and whether she would trust me enough to be part of it. And I was not going anywhere until she did. The question lingered in the air longer than it should have. Simple words from a child who had no idea she had just stepped into something that had been waiting for 10 years to surface. And I watched Emily closely, because this was the moment everything could shift, the moment where she either continued to protect the silence or allowed the truth to exist in the open, and she hesitated, just long enough for me to understand how much this decision mattered to her, how carefully she had built a life around avoiding this exact situation, and I could see it in the way her shoulders lifted slightly before settling again, like she was bracing for something she could not control anymore, and she crouched down to Lily's level, her voice gentle but measured. Just grown-up things, she said, and Lily frowned slightly, not convinced, her eyes flickering between us again, searching for something that made sense, and I recognized that look because I had worn it myself once, years ago, when answers never came the way they were supposed to, and I stepped in before the moment. Slipped away, my voice calm, careful. It is about family, I said, not looking away from Emily as I spoke, giving her the chance to stop me if she wanted to. But she did not. She just stayed still, her hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder, and the silence that followed was not resistance anymore. It was permission, quiet and unspoken, but clear enough, and Lily tilted her head again, considering that, "We are family," she said simply, and something in my chest tightened at the way she said it, certain, complete, like her world had always been just the two of them, and I nodded slowly, acknowledging that truth without taking it away from her. "Yes," I said, "but sometimes families are bigger than we think." And I saw the shift in Emily then, subtle but real, the way her eyes softened just slightly before she looked away, like she could not quite hold that moment without feeling everything she had been holding back. And I understood then that this was not about forcing the truth out. It was about giving it space to exist without breaking what she had built, and that required something I was not used to offering: patience. So I exhaled quietly and straightened, letting the tension ease just enough that Lily would not feel it pressing down on her. And I glanced around the room briefly, noting the distance to the nearest exit, the way the crowd had returned to its rhythm, unaware of what was unfolding in the middle of it. And I made a decision I would not have made 10 years ago. "Let us step outside," I said, my tone steady but not commanding, and Emily looked back at me, searching my face for something: control, pressure, anything that would give her a reason to refuse. But she did not find it, because for the first time since I had approached them, I was not trying to take something from her. I was trying to understand it, and after a second, she nodded, just once, and that was enough, because it meant she was not running, not yet, and we moved together toward the terrace, slow, deliberate, Lily between us, her small hand still wrapped in Emily's. And as the doors opened and the cooler night air replaced the warmth of the ballroom, I felt the weight of everything shift again, quieter now, more contained, like the truth was finally stepping into a place where it could be spoken, and I knew this was where it would begin, not with demands, not with anger, but with the one thing that had been missing for 10 years, the chance to finally hear why she left and why she believed she had no other choice. The night air felt different the moment we stepped outside, cooler, quieter, like the world had narrowed down to just the three of us and whatever truth had been waiting to be spoken for the past 10 years. And I noticed how Emily exhaled slightly as the doors closed behind us, like she needed that space, needed distance from the noise and the people and everything that made this harder than it already was. And Lily moved closer to her side, her small hand still wrapped around Emily's fingers. But her eyes were on me again, curious, observant, not afraid. And I had to remind myself to slow down, to let this unfold without forcing it, because whatever Emily had built for the past decade was not something I could just tear apart in a single conversation. And I leaned lightly against the railing, giving her space while still holding her attention. "Start with that night," I said quietly, not a demand, just a direction, and she looked out over the city for a moment, the lights reflecting faintly in her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than before, not guarded in the same way, just tired. "It was raining," she said, and something in me tightened immediately, because that memory had never left me either, not completely, just fragmented, incomplete, like a story missing its ending. And she continued slowly, choosing each word like it mattered. "You told me to stay in the car," and I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough for the image to surface, the sound of rain against glass, the weight of urgency I could not fully explain even now, and I nodded once, not interrupting, because this was the first time she was giving me anything real. And Lily shifted slightly, looking between us again, her brow furrowing in confusion. "You know each other," she said, and Emily's hand tightened gently around hers, grounding her. Long time ago," she answered, and I could hear the hesitation in it, the part she was not ready to explain yet, and I stepped in carefully, keeping my tone steady. "And then you left," I said, filling in the part that had always been missing for me, and Emily nodded, her gaze still fixed on the city. "I had to," she replied, and that word again, had to, not wanted to, not chose to, but had to, and that was what I needed to understand, because people do not walk away from something real without a reason strong enough to override everything else. And I pushed just a little, not enough to break the moment, but enough to keep it moving. "Why?" I asked, and this time she did not answer right away. She looked down at Lily, her expression softening in a way I had not seen before, something protective, something fierce in a quiet way, and she brushed a strand of hair away from Lily's face before speaking. "Because of her," she said, and Lily blinked up at her, confused. "Because of me," she repeated, and I felt that settle in deeper than anything else, because it confirmed what I had started to understand. This was never about her running from me. It was about her running towards something, protecting something, and I straightened slightly, focusing completely now, because this was the part that mattered most. "From what?" I asked, and Emily finally looked at me fully again. No hesitation this time, no deflection, just the truth she had been holding back, and there was a quiet intensity in her voice when she answered. "From your world," she said, and the way she said it was not an accusation, not even judgment, just a statement of fact, and for the first time since this began, I did not respond immediately, because I understood what she meant, more than she probably realized, and I glanced at Lily again, at the way she stood there between us, unaware of the weight of what was being said, and I knew this was only the beginning, because if she had spent 10 years keeping that distance, there was more to the story than just leaving. There was something that made her believe staying would have cost too much, and I was not going to walk away until I knew exactly what that was. Her words did not hit like an accusation. They settled in like something I already knew but had never said out loud, because she was right. My world was not built for innocence. It was built on control, on distance, on decisions that did not leave room for anything fragile. And standing there with the city stretched out below us and Lily between us, I could see exactly why she had made the choice she did, even if I did not agree with it. And I let that silence sit for a moment before I spoke. Again, quieter now, not defensive, not dismissive, just honest in a way I was not used to being. "You should have told me," I said, and Emily let out a slow breath, shaking her head slightly. "And what would you have done?" she asked, and it was not a challenge. It was a real question, one she had probably asked herself more times than I could count, and I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out right away, because the truth was not simple, not something I could package into a single sentence that would make sense to her or to myself. And that pause told her everything she needed to know, her lips pressing together in quiet understanding. "Exactly," she said softly, and I felt that more than anything else, not because she was right about what I would have done, but because I had not been there to prove her wrong, and I exhaled slowly, shifting my focus again, not away from the truth, but toward what mattered now. "You kept her safe," I said, acknowledging the part she had carried alone, and something in her expression softened just slightly, not relief, not forgiveness, just recognition, and she nodded once. That was the only thing that mattered. She replied, and Lily looked up at her again, still trying to follow a conversation that was just out of reach. "Safe from what?" she asked, and this time neither of us could avoid it. The question was too direct, too honest, and Emily hesitated, her hand brushing lightly over Lily's shoulder again, grounding herself as much as the child, and I stepped in before she could deflect it again, my voice calm. "Careful. From things you do not need to worry about," I said, meeting Lily's eyes so she would hear the certainty in it, and she studied me for a second before nodding slowly, accepting that answer in the way children sometimes do when they sense something bigger than they can understand, and Emily glanced at me then, something shifting in her gaze, not trust yet, but something close to it, like she was seeing a version of me she had not expected to find, and I knew that mattered, because whatever came next depended on whether she believed I could be more than the world she had run from, and I took a step closer again, not to close the distance physically, but to make sure she heard what I was about to say without distraction. "You made your choice 10 years ago," I said, steady, grounded. "Now I get to make mine." And she held my gaze, searching for the meaning behind it, for the control, the force, the inevitability she might have expected, but I did not give her any of that, just the truth as I understood it now. "I am not here to take her from you," I continued, and I saw the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly at that, almost imperceptible but real. "I am here because she is part of me, whether you wanted that or not." And the words felt different as I said them, less like a claim and more like a realization, and Lily looked between us again, her small voice breaking through the weight of everything we were saying. "Are you talking about me?" she asked, and for the first time since this began, I allowed a small, genuine shift in my expression. Something softer, something she could understand, and I nodded once. Yeah, I said quietly. We are talking about you. And Emily closed her eyes for just a second before opening them again. And when she looked at me this time, there was no more distance left to hide behind, just the reality of what we both knew now, and the understanding that whatever happened next would change all three of our lives in ways none of us could walk back from. The city stretched out beneath us like nothing had changed, lights steady, distant noise blending into something almost peaceful. But everything had changed. I could feel it in the way the air sat between us, in the way Emily no longer stepped back, no longer looked for an exit that did not exist anymore, and in the way Lily stood there quietly, watching both of us like she was trying to understand where she fit in something that suddenly felt bigger than her world. And I took a slow breath, not to steady myself, but to make sure the next words were not rushed, because this was not a moment that needed force, it needed clarity, and I lowered my voice just enough that it stayed between the three of us. Lily, I said, and she looked up at me immediately, attentive, open in a way that made this harder than anything I had faced before, and I held that gaze for a second before continuing. Sometimes adults make decisions they think are right at the time, I said carefully, choosing words she could understand without carrying the weight behind them. But that does not mean those decisions are perfect, and she frowned slightly, thinking about it. And I saw the same process in her eyes that I recognized in myself, that need to make sense of something that did not fully connect yet. And beside her, Emily stayed still, her attention fixed on me, not interrupting, not stopping this, just listening in a way that told me she had already crossed the line she had been holding for 10 years. And I shifted my focus to her for a moment, making sure she understood what I was doing, not taking control, not rewriting her life, just opening the door she had kept closed. And then I looked back at Lily. Your mom made a decision to protect you, I said, steady, grounded. And she did it well. And I meant that. I needed her to hear that, because whatever came next could not erase what Emily had done right. And Lily's expression softened slightly at that, her fingers tightening around Emily's hand. And then I added the part that mattered most, the part that changed everything. But there is something she could not tell you yet, I said, and the silence that followed was different now, not heavy, not tense, just waiting. And I let it sit for a second before finishing it. You have a father. And the words were simple, but they carried everything. And Lily blinked, her eyes widening just slightly as she processed it, looking up at Emily first, searching for confirmation, and Emily's hand trembled just enough to give it away before she steadied it again, her voice soft when she spoke. Yes, she said. And that single word was more vulnerable than anything she had said all night. And Lily turned back to me slowly, her gaze searching my face now in a way it had not before, connecting something she had not been told with something she was starting to see. And I did not